Welcome to another edition of ATL Prime Sports. I'm your host, Jurjevich. Joining me this evening is the one, the only TC Todd Corder, and of course, Wayne Ridenauer in beautiful Memphis, Tennessee. Again, you can find us all at ATL Prime Sports on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. And then you can search ATL Prime Sports on Apple and Spotify. You can find myself on Twitter at JJGetYouOne. Find Todd at Corder Todd and Wayne at RWY Jr. Those are our personal Twitters. How's everybody doing tonight? Wayne, we'll start off with you, buddy.
Well, I'm doing pretty good, but I tell you who's doing better is Georgia native Chase Elliott, son of famous Bill Elliott, who won the first round of the NASCAR playoff at Talladega, surprisingly in a race that had no big wrecks, which is kind of weird for Talladega, but I like the race better when there's no big wrecks.
Yeah, it's very rare for Talladega not to have at least one 10 or 12 car pileup. I'm doing well. It's a lot better than the Texas OU Red River rivalry. Both teams come in unranked for the first time since 1998, and that is hard to imagine. TC, how you doing tonight, buddy?
Doing fantastic. Kansas 5-0, playing TCU 4-0. If somebody had that in Vegas to start the season, I want to know. I've got Clark Atlanta versus Allen this week out in Columbia, South Carolina. Can't wait for that tilt.
We can't wait to hear you on the call. What's on tap for today's show? Talking GSU Panthers with voice of the Panthers, Dave Cohen. We have a college football roundtable. Talk a little Braves, Falcons, and of course the pick six. I killed it last week, 5-1, so I'm excited to get to that part of the show. But without further ado, we welcome voice of the Panthers, friend of the show. Look, Georgia State defeated Army on the road Saturday, improving to 1-4 on the season. With that being said, we do welcome back voice of the Panthers, Dave Cohen. Dave, thanks for coming on. How you doing tonight, man?
Doing pretty good, guys. Always a pleasure to be with you, and it's so much more pleasurable to come on this ATL Prime Sports podcast after a W instead of talking about an L, and it was a big one for Georgia State to go on the road. You know, I was cautiously optimistic. We talked about it last week with Army. You kind of know what you're going to get. They're going to try to run it down your throat. They ran for, 472 against Villanova the week before. So it was all hands on deck, batten down the hatches, get ready for the Army running game. And, they ran for almost 400 yards against us. We just took advantage of some turnovers. And what Coach Elliott told me in the pregame on radio last Saturday, got to get off to a good start. And we did get off to a good start. We had a 17-0 lead heading into the locker room at halftime. We knew that we would get an Army run. They came out and scored twice in that third quarter to make it a 17-14 ball game. But where the game turned, in this radio reporter's opinion, if you watched or listened, they had the ball on a 4th and a yard, less than a yard to go to score, which would have put them up 20-17, 21 if they would have kicked the PAT. But Georgia State stuffed them at the 1 and kept them out of the end zone. And I felt the momentum swung after the defense came up with that big play. And that, by my count, was just one of 4 huge plays that Georgia State made on both the offensive and the defensive side of the ball in that second half to get out of West Point with a 31-14 win.
Yeah, the crazy finish. You mentioned the 31-14 win. 17-14 by my count with about, 3:30 to play. I thought another key play was you guys stopped Army on a fake punt attempt, which I thought was pretty surprising there. I thought they were going to punt the football. They had some timeouts left by my memory, if it serves me correctly. So I thought that was a key play in the game. And then hats off to Tucker Gregg for breaking the TD record. Your comments on the Army win after that, history in the making for Tucker Gregg.
Yeah, well, that was our third meeting with Army. We've beaten them now twice. Beat them the first time, lost the game last year, and then returned the favor with a win on the road last Saturday. Tucker Gregg, great kid. Interviewed him just the other day for one of our practice reports. 56-yard touchdown run. That was his 20th rushing touchdown, which broke the previous record of 19 set by Trey Barnett. And, on a number of our other broadcasts, we've talked about how such a great story Tucker Gregg is, because he was a walk-on student athlete out of Chatsworth, Georgia, way down on the depth chart list with regards to running backs when he got to Georgia State. And just what he has been able to accomplish with his hard work, his consistency, his stick-to-itiveness. And, again, as I said to him, I said, look, 3 years ago, who would have thought we'd be standing here talking about you, meaning Tucker, being the all-time leader in rushing touchdowns. So, he's been a great example for walk-on players all across the country in all sports, because he's going to leave Georgia State as one of the great running backs in Georgia State football history. But his 56-yard run ultimately put us up 31-14. I don't want to overlook the Darren Granger 57-yard touchdown pass to Jakias Cradle. And we also had an interception in that second half from Bright Keese Brown, which was huge at the time. Anytime with Army you can get the takeaways, you got to get them, because and I was talking to our offensive coordinator about this yesterday. It can be like football quicksand if you find yourself behind on the scoreboard against Army, because they run so much clock with the way they run that offense, that if you fall behind by a couple of touchdowns or at least 2 scores, it always becomes a question, will there be enough time left to get your offense on the field enough to score twice, to give you 2 opportunities to score? So that was one of the reasons why we needed to get off to a good start, which is true for every ball game, but maybe more so against Army. And then, again, coming up with big plays on both sides of the ball. So much better to be going into the Georgia Southern game at 1-4 than 0-5. And this is deja vu all over again, guys. We did this a year ago. Georgia State was 1-4 after the first 5 ball games. Now, we weren't going into the Georgia Southern game in Game 6 a year ago, but it does feel like deja vu all over again. And we'll see how Georgia State responds coming off a win as they get ready to head into Game 6 of the season. It's hard to believe we're almost at the midway point of the college football season. That, too, is crazy.
Too fast.
Yeah.
Flies, Dave, and I tell you what, speaking of time, Chuck Knox going back in time, he would really be proud to watch that game on Sunday with all the rushing yards, the old Los Angeles Rams coach, Ground Chuck. That's just, and then my question would be, what is it like at Army? I mean, you've got to pay attention a little bit more what's going on down the field than you would any other place, with all the pageantry and the respect for our country and everything else. That has to be something that catches your eye than other sports venues.
Yeah, I wish that we had more time to look around campus. I know a lot of our fans that made a weekend of it spent time in New York City and then made the trek out to West Point. They had time to look around and kind of take in the sights and get a little bit more of the flavor of the atmosphere. The radio crew didn't. The team hotel was in Stamford, Connecticut, an hour and a half away. So we left the team hotel Saturday morning at 8:30. And literally, we pulled into West Point's campus there right at 10 a.m., and we were on the air at 11:30. So, an hour and a half is not enough to go venturing too far from the press box when you've got to be on, at 11:30 for a 12 noon kick. So really, the only part that I saw was out the bus window heading into campus, out the bus window heading off of campus, and what I could see out the broadcast booth window when we first got up there. But our coaches called it assignment football. I've heard that when we've played Georgia Southern in the past, and I've heard it in the 2 prior games against Army. And really, anytime you play a team that is run heavy and runs the option the way Army does and the way Georgia Southern used to, you really got to focus and maintain your sight, your vision of who and where that ball is. I'll admit there were 1 or 2 occasions, our radio booth was high enough up that I had to use the binoculars to really keep an eye on what play Army was running and who ultimately had the football. They only completed one pass. I think they put the ball in the air 7 times, and I think Tyler and Ballard, the 2 quarterbacks for Army, were combined, I want to say 1 for 7 throwing the football. So every play was, a run play, and you'd really got to pay attention. And, I guess it's a little easier if you're looking above, down on the field with binoculars as we are. But if you're a middle linebacker and you're a DB, a corner, or a safety, you got to really be able to focus in on who and where that football ends up after that ball is snapped. And they take all of their snaps, both quarterbacks, except late in the game for Ballard, took all of their snaps real tight under center. So it was really hard to see unless you're really paying attention. Ultimately, we knew what plays they were going to run because they were going to run the football, but ultimately who ended up with the football in their hands.
That's great insight, Dave. Speaking of the future here coming up, they've got Georgia Southern, the number 1 rival for Georgia State. It is Southern Week. Georgia Southern has a new head coach in Clay Helton, who was at Southern in California. What can you tell us about this upcoming opponent, and what type of atmosphere is it for this game? Because you must feel it a little bit differently for this one than you do the others.
Well, yeah, and talking to some of our players the first 2 days of practice this week, Monday and Tuesday, it is one of those games when the schedule first comes out. Eyes always look at the schedule and try to focus on, what date is the Georgia Southern game. This year initially everybody was excited about going to South Carolina to open the season and finally having a Power 5 opponent in North Carolina coming into Center Park Stadium. But it always comes down to, what date are we playing Georgia Southern, whether it's Atlanta or whether it's down in Statesboro. And again, they're a little bit different under Clay Helton than they have been. They're 3-2. They lost a really close ball game. I don't know if you saw the highlight of the kid who leaped over the Georgia Southern defender, C.J. Beasley. That was like a national highlight. He leaped literally over the Georgia Southern defender to score that touchdown. But they're going to come into Atlanta at 3-2, and they have a transfer quarterback who came in from Buffalo, and I'm just going to give you his numbers in the Coastal game. He was 26 of 43, 284 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception, 1 fumble. And again, that's very un-Georgia Southern-like with regards to the amount of times that they put the ball in the air. So when we think Georgia Southern, don't think Georgia Southern teams of the past where it's like Army, run, maybe 1 pass, and then run again another 10 times. That apparently, from what I've seen and what I've read, is not Georgia Southern football anymore. So we're going to find out quickly on Saturday.
Yeah, well, the only thing I would say about this upcoming game is, as everybody, I guess, on campus knows, it's #state, not Southern.
Yeah, that's been going around since they followed us into the Sun Belt Conference. Okay. Georgia State, Georgia Southern rivalry has been going on for years. We were in the old Trans-America Athletic Conference with them, which became the Atlantic Sun. The one difference was they left and went to the Southern Conference, and then at one point Georgia State left and went into the Colonial Athletic Association, the CAA. But in those early years, the rivalry really extended to men's basketball, men's and women's basketball and baseball and some of the other sports. But it never experienced the football rivalry because we weren't playing football. And the rivalry has gone to a whole new level since we added football and since they followed us into the Sun Belt Conference. And now, it is a showdown once a year, Statesboro, Atlanta, Statesboro on the gridiron, which has taken the rivalry, who is the real GSU, to the next level. And, again, it's a game that I know fans on both sides look forward to. As much as this state talks about Georgia Tech in Georgia, which has been played for, over 100 years?
Yeah.
Georgia State, Georgia Southern, in our world, is just as intense. It just hasn't been around as long.
Yeah. Well, I'd tell you another game that you've got upcoming. It's a little off in the distance. Is a Southern Miss, and they actually handed somebody in our conference their first loss, Tulane, which was surprisingly unbeat. But that may be an interesting game down in Hattiesburg, which is a stadium that I do not like to visit because when I was down there last, they still had wooden bleachers.
Yeah, I haven't seen much of Southern Miss on video yet this year. You're right, we're going to play them a little later on this season in Hattiesburg, but at the very least, the four new schools that came into the Sun Belt, you can't say enough about, the strength of the Sun Belt, the strength of the Sun Belt East. Thank goodness Southern Miss is over in the West because we already have to deal with Marshall and James Madison and Old Dominion, and they all have really good wins so far this year. As we were talking about James Madison off air before the podcast tonight, they're 4-0 in the league, and Coastal Carolina's 5-0 in the league, and they're both in the Sun Belt East with App State, Marshall, Georgia State, Georgia Southern, and Old Dominion. So every year it's going to be an absolute drag-down dogfight to win that Sun Belt East. But just to say one thing about James Madison, maybe more so than Old Dominion and Marshall, because they came in as 1As. James Madison came in as a top-flight FCS 1AA program. They kind of have done what Appalachian State did. App State and Georgia Southern did to a degree. They just couldn't maintain it. They weren't consistent. But Appalachian State was a top 10 FCS program before they played their first game as a Sun Belt Conference member. And James Madison was in the FCS semifinals of the playoffs a year ago. So I knew they were going to hit the ground running. I didn't know they'd get off to a 4-0 start and play as well as they have played, but I'm not surprised one iota that they're doing what they're doing in football in their first year in the Sun Belt Conference.
You're listening to Dave Cohen right here on ATL Prime Sports. You can find Dave on Twitter at GA State Voice. Dave, my next question, you led us right into it pretty perfectly, is about them James Madison Dukes. We talked about it off there, they can't participate in the Sun Belt Championship. What are your comments about that rule? Because I find it a little odd that they can't come in and compete. And then kind of the second part of that question would be, does that kind of help Georgia State out since they can't make a bowl game this year? Does that add, help Georgia State out in the long run? I think it kind of does, right?
Well, only if we win at least 5 more ball games and we become bowl eligible. If we don't, then it's a moot point. Yeah, fingers crossed. But yeah, to answer your question, and we've been through this before, Georgia State has, James Madison has. Any team, for example, when we left the Colonial Athletic Association, when Georgia State, made the announcement that we were leaving the Colonial, right away, the rule in the CAA is that if you're a team that is exiting the conference, all of your teams for that final year become ineligible for any CAA postseason. Now, in this instance, that rule about not being eligible for a bowl game or to compete for a championship, it's on the front end. They've already experienced it. JMU already experienced it last year on the back end. None of their teams were eligible for a CAA championship, which in what we've gone through over the last 2.5 years with regards to the benefits to the student athlete, the fact that the Colonial Athletic Association continues with that rule, and I'm not sure if any other conferences have that rule, at the end of the day, don't tout that you're all about the benefits and the well-being of the student athlete, because the only people who are taking the brunt of a conference change are the student athletes when they have to deal with rules like that. So what does the Colonial Athletic Association say to any school who announces they're leaving the conference, to all of those student athletes? don't on one hand say you really care about the well-being and the welfare and the benefit of the student athlete. What you've just told them is because our school announced that we're moving to a new conference, which student athletes have absolutely no say in, they're the ones who take the brunt of it by being told you're not eligible to play for a conference championship. Same thing on the front end. I don't want to hear any more talk about the benefits and worrying about the benefits of the student athlete, because if they did, James Madison would be eligible ASAP.
I agree with that 100%. TCU, you had one more.
Georgia State went through it. I'm talking about the Colonial Athletic when the CAA. Georgia State went through it. George Mason went through it. Old Dominion went through it. Virginia Commonwealth went through it recently. Any team that's left the CAA that last year in the league, they're not eligible for any of the postseason championships.
That's strange.
So I'm saying to them, don't talk about you're worried about the student athlete.
Agree 100%. TC?
Yes, Dave, go back to the opponent this week, Kyle Van Treese. He's had a heck of a year so far. They had the win against Nebraska. They had a tough loss to UAB and a tough loss to Coastal Carolina. This is a team that could easily be 4-1. You mentioned them. They put the ball up in the air. This is a pretty high-powered offense. What does Georgia State need to do defensively to stop them? What is the key in your mind?
Well, obviously, if you can get some takeaways, when I was looking at the numbers for Van Treese, and I don't have them right here in front of me other than as I mentioned, he had the 2 touchdowns, the 1 interception, the 1 fumble. I do know he's thrown 7 interceptions this year. So I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that our defensive backs are chomping at the bit for that football to go in the air come Saturday. But I would approach it very similar to Army, even though they don't run quite as much as Georgia Southern has in the past. We're going to have to get some pressure up front. One number that really kind of has stuck out, which is so unlike what Georgia State did a year ago, where they, set all kind of, program records with tackles for loss and sacks. And I think the number, and I don't have it in front of me right, but I think the number is we've only got 2 quarterback sacks in 5 games this year. So, obviously one of the keys, our defensive guys up front, our guys on the edge, like Jameel Muhammad, like Shamar McCullum, the Wake Forest transfer, like John Trey Hunter, going to have to go ahead and become more disruptive. Going to have to get some penetration and get some pressure on Van Treese, force him hopefully into enough bad throws that we were able to come up with some and force some turnovers, and be ready for the run. Just because they throw more doesn't mean they still don't run the football. They still run the football, just not quite to the level that we've become accustomed to. And then, we've got to continue to do what we did in that second half against Georgia, at Army. And that's look to throw downfield a little bit more with the kind of precise passes that Darren Granger made, especially like to Jakias Cradle. Got to look for Robert Lewis and Shamari Thrash, our top 3 receivers. I'm waiting to see if Aubrey Payne, our returning tight end, who's only played like 10 snaps the whole season, been battling a nagging injury. I'm hoping that he's going to be back. If he's not, then they got to look for 84 and 85, Chris Bird and Amon Green, the number 2 and number 3 tight ends. Got to get the tight end involved. Basically the same thing that, other than a game against Army, the answer would be basically the same almost every week. Football's not a terribly difficult game when it comes to scheming per se. And I've never coached, so somebody's going to watch this and say, well, he's an idiot. You can only run with it, throw it, or kick it. And you just got to continue to execute the plays. You can't give up big plays up the middle. You can't give up big plays down the sideline or in the middle of the field to, receivers running crossing routes. We've seen that at times this year. We gave up big plays. Special teams has to be spot on. No block punts. no missed field goals, no missed PATs. We're going to need every point that we can muster every week, but, certainly against Georgia Southern. And, hopefully we'll play a good football game. Again, I've been at the first 2 days of practice, and they were solid days of practice. Coach Elliott seemed to be pleased. And, luckily this year it's a home game. Next year we'll have to return it and get down to Statesboro.
Yeah, well, I'd add one more. I'd add one more to the run.
Second, Wayne. I was going to say, this kid, it's his 6th year thanks to COVID. He's his 5th year last year, the transfer from Buffalo. Dave, he's almost attempted as many passes now in this part of the season than any part he ever had in his career. And he's already passed his touchdown mark in a career too. So, this will be interesting to see what Georgia State does in the turnover category. So, it'd be a very interesting game. The kid transferring from Buffalo, from Ohio, and like you said, picking him off would definitely be one of the keys. Tell us where we can listen to the game. We'll let you go.
Yeah, and all I'll say about Kyle Van Treese, and I've only seen highlights, bits here, bits in, and bits there, is that, listen, he entered the transfer portal, and it's obviously worked out for him. He's found a place at Georgia Southern, playing for Clay Helton, and he has found a role coming in from Buffalo. So more power to him. I just hope that Georgia State is able to contain him and get enough pressure on him and force some turnovers so that he doesn't come into Center Park Stadium and have a lot of success on Saturday afternoon. Anyone who wants to listen to our radio broadcast, again, we're on the 50,000-watt flagship, 88.5 FM WRAS. Gainesville, Georgia, Hall County up in North Georgia, WGTJ 97.5 FM, and anyone listening online can visit lowcountryradio.com. It's an online radio station out of Savannah, Georgia, and they're with us for the first year. Other than that, the GSU Athletics mobile app and TuneIn radio app. Search WRAS, and we'll be right there.
Dave, as always, thanks for coming on. Wayne, you had one more comment real quick.
Oh, I was just going to say that to add to the run, pass, and kick, if you're Auburn, you can also fumble.
Yeah, turnovers are their own separate category. But, you watch some of the TV shows with all the ex-players on there, and they try to make football sometimes, in my opinion, a little too scientific. At the end of the day, it's 11 on 11, and they're either going to run it, they're going to throw it, or they're going to kick it. Let's not make it more than what it really is. And he who has the best players and the most talented players a lot of times going to win the football game.
And that is your insight from the voice of the Georgia State Panthers, Dave Cohen. Dave, thanks for coming on as always. Go Panthers. Hopefully we talk to you next week. We're 2-4 with a rivalry W.
That would be nice. I think out of the 8 times Georgia State and Georgia Southern have played, Georgia State has won 5 of them. So let's try to keep heading in that direction as opposed to making the rivalry a little bit closer.
Absolutely. Again, you can find Dave Cohen on Twitter at GA State Voice. Dave, thanks for coming on as always, and go Panthers.
Appreciate it. We'll talk to you next week.
See you. Dave Cohen, voice of the Georgia State Panthers. Thanks so much. Let's move on in the show. Talk some college football since we were already talking it. After 5 weeks of college football, only 16 unbeaten teams remain. Let's talk under the radar college football storylines. And let's talk about the surprise unbeatens, fellas. I mean, we got 4 of them. Bunch of basketball schools and then TCU and UCLA. So you got Kansas, Syracuse, TCU, and UCLA. That's what we're talking about. Which of these 4 teams finishes with the highest college football playoff ranking? I don't know how high that will be, but we're going to figure it out. Between us 3, we're going to choose who we think has the best finish of these 4 teams. And I'll tell you right now, I'll start this one off. I think it's TCU. I really feel all these teams are going to fall back around 8 wins at the end of the season. They'll probably all be close, if not right there at the top 25 at the back end of it at the end of the season. Because looking at these teams' schedules, they're tough. Syracuse has 5 legitimate tests coming up in back-to-back weeks. At home versus NC State, at number 5 Clemson, Notre Dame, at Pittsburgh, Florida State, and at number 15 Wake Forest. So Syracuse is probably going to drop a couple of those. So that's why another reason I lean towards TCU. UCLA plays their two toughest opponents again in ensuing weeks. They go to number 14 Oregon in 2 weeks, and they play Utah this weekend. That's a pick six game. We'll get into that one in a little bit. But look, the Bruins, and they still got in-state rival, I should say in-city rival, USC later on. Kansas, they play TCU. They're number 19. TCU's number 17. They play that this weekend. But after the TCU game, the Jayhawks go into the meat of their schedule at Oklahoma, at Baylor, versus number 7 Oklahoma State, and then in the season with in-state rival number 20 Kansas State right now. So TCU, look, they already beat Oklahoma. If they get past Kansas, they have a home game versus Oklahoma State and a home game versus number 20 K-State. So the trips to Texas and Waco, which would be Baylor, that seems more manageable to me. That's why I like TCU to finish higher than the other 3 teams at the end of the season. TC, what say you, buddy? What do you think about these teams first? And then we'll just have fun with it.
This is a year of the unexpected so far. Everybody wants to talk about the big name brands, but this to me is a little more interesting. I mean, this is a tremendous story. Who would have thunk at the beginning of the season that Kansas, TCU, Syracuse, and UCLA are all undefeated? You know, UCLA's got a special game this week, and we'll see if they, if they can win it. It's going to be tough. Syracuse, they'll get into the meat of their schedule. And of course, you mentioned Kansas and TCU. We mentioned earlier in the podcast the 2 undefeated teams in James Madison and Coastal Carolina. USC, even though they're a brand name, they're undefeated. A lot of folks didn't have them undefeated either. And Tennessee is undefeated. So that may be Georgia's most difficult test thus far, but the job that Lance Leipold has done in Kansas is second to none. And I'm telling you right now, he better stay by the phone because it's going to ring, and it's going to ring off the hook. There's a lot of jobs that come to mind already this season, and we've already seen some uncharacteristic firings this early in the year. And we'll get to those later on in the show. But in terms of being undefeated, in terms of the 4 teams that you mentioned, I would have to agree with TCU. But you know what? Chip Kelly and UCLA last week, they surprised me by beating an undefeated Washington team in Penix. Heck of a job at quarterback that he's done. And UCLA is a pleasant surprise out west, and who knows, maybe it'll be UCLA and USC to battle it out in the Pac-12 South. This has been a year. Well, see what happens there. This is going to be one heck of a ball game between UCLA and Utah, and a lot of folks have Utah winning it. But again, the season of the unexpected thus far. Just a lot of wonderful stories in college football. And we have a wonderful one coming up here locally, too.
Yeah, as far as these unbeaten teams, the one that sticks out to me is Kansas, and that's because I'm starting to get memories of 2007 when Kansas went, I think they only had 1 loss to Missouri in the, the border war, and they were, to me, if my memory serves correct, they were not even under consideration for championship, and Florida ended up with that championship for that year. So will this be a redemption year for Kansas if they get into that Final Four?
It'll be tough. So you think Kansas might finish at the top there? I like the pick. I like chaos. That picture right there, ladies and gentlemen, is from 2007, and that's when it started to get crazy, is when Georgia upset Auburn in a blackout game, and things really started to go nuts for college football. That 2007 season, Kansas and Missouri were both involved in number 1 losses the last 3 weeks of the season, and then West Virginia was there too. So I like I like the chaos theory you have there. Let's move on from these 4 unbeatens and the surprise unbeatens to another under the radar story. which is right here in this state, folks. It's Georgia Tech. Gets their second win of the season and moves within a game of first place in the ACC Coastal. That's right. The 2-3 Yellow Jackets are within a game of first place. Let's talk Ramblin' Wreck from Georgia Tech for a second straight week. And Todd, I'll throw it right to you. What do you think happens with this Georgia Tech team and new interim coach Brent Key, who already got that win under his belt? What do you think about the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets' chances in the Coastal Division moving forward?
1-0 under Key, got the win at Pittsburgh last week, a ranked Pittsburgh team last week. They're no longer ranked. Did it in the rain and in nasty weather conditions, and now they play Duke. And if they defeat Duke and North Carolina loses to Miami, and I know there's some ifs, they could find themselves in first place in the Coastal, and that would be one heck of a story. Who would have thunk that when the season began? This is what Georgia Tech's first FBS win in 9 tries. They got a shot to take advantage of this division. This is one heck of a story that is really under the radar. The game is not even, I don't believe it is televised. I don't believe it is televised here locally at all, which is stunning. Or is it on ESPN Plus, JJ? I couldn't remember.
I'm pretty sure the Georgia Tech game is on ESPN Plus this weekend.
Yeah, that's right.
ESPN 3 game. Yep.
Right. You and I talked about that. We were stunned it wasn't even on, and you're going to have to go find it online on ESPN Plus. And wow, I mean, these stories in college football, once again, they just don't get talked about enough. And we like to dig here and keep digging and talk about this. And we mentioned last week about all the coaching potential candidates. And right now, the guy, Key, if he keeps winning, he'll be the guy, because it is all about winning. And we'll see what happens this week against Duke. It would be one heck of a story if they pulled it off.
Yeah, I had mentioned Derek Dooley as possible head coach, but if Key keeps winning, I would say he's definitely going to be in, because it's somebody that the school is familiar with, the players are familiar with, and that's always a good thing moving forward.
And he's got the Saban stamp added to his resume as well. I like Brent Key. Before we get into the Wisconsin hiring deal that has got to be talked about, it is a big story. I'm going to throw it around and say, guys, give me one more under-the-radar college football story that isn't talked about enough, and TC, we'll start with you.
Well, I mean, we mentioned the undefeateds. We mentioned Georgia Tech. I mean, there's so many of them. One story that really isn't talked about a lot is the Mississippi schools. I mean, they don't have the high school football pedigree that a lot of these states here in the Southeast do. They compete in the Southeastern Conference. They compete in the Western Division, which is the toughest division, arguably, in college football. And to see Ole Miss under Lane Kiffin 5-0 and ranked number 9 in the country, and then Leach and Mississippi State at 23rd, and they're 4-1, and Mississippi State took Texas A&M to the woodshed last week. To me, this is gigantic. And if one of these teams or each of them could contend in the West and give Alabama all they can handle, well, then the story just gets bigger, because if you win West, you're playing for the conference title. If you win the conference title in this mammoth conference, because it just means more, you're in the playoff. And that's a long way to go. I mean, you look at this division, LSU, there's 4 teams alone that are ranked in this division and 7 in the conference, and it's a tremendous story.
Yeah, my tremendous story is in Duke, North Carolina. It's about them Duke Blue Devils. They're 4-1 after struggling last year. New head coach, no problem. I think that's a great story. Another basketball school that's having some success on the gridiron. Wayne, Any other under the radar stories with you? You can talk about your Memphis Tigers here. They're always under the radar.
Well, yeah, they're under the radar, but they've got a big test coming up with Houston, and they're actually favored over Houston for this weekend. But on the other end of the state, more or less, I think that it's kind of gone unspoken about how the two UCF people, the head coach and the athletic director, have pretty much turned the UT Vols around and made them really a contender in the East.
It's another great point. It's another great point. We would talk about
JJ,
Tennessee a lot.
Can I cut in
Sure.
and make a point here?
TC's cutting in, folks.
I'm cutting in. Thank you. John Calipari probably took a toast on a wine glass when he knows Kentucky's still a basketball school when Ole Miss defeated Kentucky this past week. That was the joke that was going around in Lexington, that Calipari's right. We're still a basketball school. Give us most of the attention, even during football season.
All right, folks. We did mention Wisconsin fired their head coach, Paul Chryst, the other day after a 2-3 start. Thoughts on who the next guy might be right here on ATL Prime Sports, folks. If you like the content, give us a like, give us a thumbs up, ring the bell on YouTube, and find us on Apple and Spotify, and, of course, at ATL Prime Sports across the board. Let's go back into it again. Wisconsin fired Coach Paul Chryst on Sunday, I believe, after the 2-3 start. Who might come in afterward? Look, Chryst went 67-26 during his 6 years there. I think it was 6 or 7 years there, whatever it was. Maybe it was longer than that. I can't remember. But he was great. 6-1 in bowl games. With Michigan and Ohio State in the conference, I don't think you can do much better than that. I think he went to the Big Ten title game 3 times. Defensive coordinator Jim Leonhard will take over as the interim head coach, and a lot of people think if he wins some games, it'll be kind of like the Brent Key situation. A lot of people in Wisconsin and Madison, they think that he is their guy. He's the coach in waiting, and he's finally gotten his opportunity. We'll let that one play out by ear. I think he might be the favorite, but TC mentioned another one earlier, and Lance Leopold, the Kansas Jayhawks head coach, has built Buffalo up. Now we obviously see what he's done with 2 years in Lawrence, Kansas. So he may be getting a call as we speak. Todd, what's your thoughts on Paul Chryst getting fired?
Well, when you think about it now, with the big money in college football, expectations does not exceed reality here. And the reality is he did a great job for all those years at Wisconsin, won a ton of games, and it still wasn't good enough. And the fact that he lost to a former Wisconsin head coach in Brett Bielema before he went down and took the Arkansas job, and that ended up being a disaster for him. He came to Illinois, went into Wisconsin's barn, and beat them pretty handily this week. And I guess the brass and administration / alumni and et cetera didn't like the loss, so they went ahead and fired him, which to me stunned me. I don't know what the folks in Wisconsin think, but if you're these schools are letting the big money get involved in their decisions now. And, Wisconsin's not going to be a national title contender every year. And if you allow that to happen, you're going to change coaches frequently. And I guess losing to their former coach was the final straw. So I guess the embarrassment of losing that game, they decided to say that's it. And they bring in Jim Leonhard, and he is the number one guy. Another guy that's mentioned is Luke Fickell out of Cincinnati. You mentioned Lance Leopold. Dave Aranda, the current Baylor head coach.
Matt Campbell's been mentioned as well at Iowa State.
Right. Dave Doran, I don't think they're going there to Iowa State. We'll see. Sean Lewis, the current head coach at Kent State. That's another interesting name. Jamie Chadwell at Coastal Carolina. There are a few more down the line. Bill O'Brien, obviously, another coach who's had a lot of success in his career, had a success at Penn State. And, of course, with Houston, Texas in the NFL, now at Alabama OC, every Alabama OC under Saban seems to get a really good job. The latest would be Steve Sarkisian, who's at Texas. So, anyhow, that's the situation. We'll see how it all plays out.
Let's move on to our NFL topic. We are talking Atlanta Falcons, a surprising 2-2. Let's talk Dirty Birds. Can the Falcons make the playoffs? TC, I'll start with you because I know your answer, and it's pretty similar to mine, but I want to hear it anyway.
Well, I tell you what, I mean, can they make it? Sure. I mean, they're off to 2-2 start after starting off 0-2, losing to New Orleans after holding the big 26-10 lead. We all know what happened. Then they got way behind with the Rams, came back and fell just short. And then the last two games, it's really been a remarkable turnaround. Running the football on a Cleveland team, even though they were missing defensive linemen. That offensive line, to me, has really improved in the last year. And it's really the same personnel. That's the part that's really amazing to me when you talk about the Falcons, and then shift over to the defensive line. I mean, wow, just this team has really improved. They're able to get a pass rush. Now playing Tampa Bay this week, that's in our pick 6. We'll see how that goes. But if they could beat Tampa Bay this week, holy smokes, they would be in first place in the NFC South. And then, then you really got something going there. But the guy that sticks out to me on the defensive line for Atlanta is Taquan Graham. I mean, he was everywhere against the Browns. Really impressive, young talent getting a chance to play, and also letting others get in there to make plays when he's not. So he is wreaking havoc on that D-line. And as you know, these games are won on the line of scrimmage. And what the coaching staff has done, I think, with this Falcons team is quite remarkable.
I'm right there with you. Absolutely. It can happen. It probably won't. But if Marcus Mariota can take care of the football, the Falcons can manage the IR stint of running back Cordero Patterson, sure. But that's a lot of ifs right now. But I don't know if they will. Look, missing 4 weeks from Patterson's going to be huge. Minimum of 4 weeks, I should say. Although in his absence last week in the second half, Tyler Algier from BYU and Caleb Huntley upgraded from the, called up from the practice squad. They combined for 20 carries, 10 apiece for a combined 140 yards. And Huntley got in the end zone. So if they can get that kind of production out of those backup running backs while Patterson's gone, this Cordell Patterson's in the top, just judging by shooting from the hip, I'd say he's top 10 in the NFL in rushing right now. You mentioned it, Todd. Their offensive line is doing more with the same personnel and a lot better than last year. So this team is a pleasant surprise, not only here in the NFL, in the Atlanta area, but around the NFL. Wayne, what are your thoughts on the Falcons making the playoffs, and quick comments on the Atlanta Falcons before we move on to the world champion Atlanta Braves?
Well, I said from the beginning that the Falcons would lose the first 2 games and the very last game. And so I'm still on that mindset. There's a chance, I think, that they may start changing their scheme up a little bit to include Kyle Pitts, because when he was handling the ball in the 2 games they won, he was doing really well. But in closing, I'd want to say I'm going to make me a bumper sticker for my car that says, "I believe in Arthur Smith and Falcons football." That's going to be my bumper sticker.
Hey, he's a great coach. He's really proving it. I'll tell you what, if Marcus Mariota can fix the passing game, get a little bit more on the deep ball, throw a few more touchdown passes, and cut down on the interception and fumble. I think he has three touchdowns, 4 interceptions, and 4 lost fumbles. I think 6 total fumbles on the year. So if he can clean up those fumbles, You like the Falcons' chances. TC, any final thoughts on the Atlanta Falcons?
I'd love to be a fly on the wall in the Falcons room wondering this week if Mariota struggles against that front four at Tampa. And most folks have, except for Kansas City last week. With the Buccaneers and a loss, they are going to be one angry team. This is a bad week to play Tampa. They didn't even try to run the football last week. They only had 6 attempts at running the football. I don't care who the quarterback is, Tom Brady, you're just not going to win against an elite team like Kansas City. You got to keep that offense off the field. And if you're the Falcons, you've got to be able to run the football and protect it to have a chance at Tampa. But do they play the kid Ritter if things go wrong? Or do they bring him in for a package if things for a change-up? I'm really interested to see to try to get a feel of this coaching staff. Are they going to bring in Ritter if multiple things happen? Because he's got legs and he can make things happen. But that's totally different in the preseason than it is in the regular season because he'll be facing the starters from Jump Street.
Now let's move on. I agree with that 100%. It may be Ritter time here in the ATL. Let's move on. Quickly running out of time here before we get to our pick six. Let's talk about the Major League Baseball world champion Atlanta Braves. Swept the Mets. Won the division Tuesday night in Miami. Let's talk chop about the NL East champion Atlanta Braves. We talked about this earlier in the year, Wayne and TC. Talked about this team could get more wins than last year's world championship team. They did, winning 101 games this year. How far do you see this team going, TC?
Interesting question because I've been debating this back and forth. You know, I'm not a fan of them having to sit 6 days before they play their game for their first playoff game. Baseball is a rhythm sport. It's not football where rest is required unless you've got nagging injuries and you want to rest the team. That's one thing. But this is a game you need to keep playing. The pitchers need to keep pitching. The hitters need to keep hitting. You can simulate it all you want in practice, but in a game situation, it is really different. So, I mean, yes, it's great to win the division, but it just doesn't mean as much as it used to be because one of these teams happen to have a fallback, and that's the wild card, and the Mets are going to play. So maybe it's a good thing. Who knows? Los Angeles has won 110 games. They're definitely the favorite. But this team has, I mean, what they've done to catch the Mets, you know, they were only in first place, 10 days all year? I mean,
not even.
They were not even, right. They were 10.5 back. Thank you. They were 10.5 back in June and caught them. The odds are long, but they did it because they played remarkable baseball. You can't count them out, especially after the improbable last year. I think they'll play in the World Series. I said it at Corder Todd on Twitter. I think they'll play the Yankees and Aaron Judge, who's having a magical season. But golly, it's so hard to repeat. I'm picking the Yanks to win it all and Aaron Judge to have a magical postseason.
Wow, I'm glad you think the Braves are going to the World Series because I think they are too. I think they at least get to the league championship series, I should say. Look, this team is built to slug teams out. They're built to hit home runs. That's what they do, 241 of them, most in the National League, second most to your Yankees, 30 more than the Dodgers. Braves are top 5 in ERA, team ERA, it's at 340. Like they did it last year, they can do it this year. I don't see why getting 6 days rest in a new style of Major League Baseball where these players kind of want the rest, especially with Ozzie Albies, Ronald Acuna, Spencer Strider. Those guys need rest, and I think that benefits them. Maybe they get Ozzie Albies back for the division series. It's a long shot, but they do think he can get to the league championship series if he's available, so that rest would help. Look, the Braves almost did something no other team has done in the history of Major League Baseball. They almost went a full season without a sacrifice bunt, but Michael Harris laid one down the other day for some odd reason. They did that. I was really hoping that they'd be the first team to not do it. So I think that's pretty cool. But look, you mentioned it. They were 10.5 out. They've won 5 NL East titles in a row. This one might be the most improbable because of that 10.5 game margin. According to Alliance Sports Bureau, hold on, Todd. Let me finish here. According to Alliance Sports,
last year, if I could say, I thought last year was the most
TC's cutting in.
I am cutting in. Enjoy it. What I'm saying is, if I could, that last year I think was the most improbable, being under 500 in August. This team has played really well. The Mets just caught fire, and for them to come back to the pack and for Atlanta to catch them this late, the whole thing is remarkable, and the postseason is going to be a lot of fun. I can't wait for it.
Well, what I was going to say to top off my point of why I think this one's more improbable than last year's, and then I was going to throw it to you and ask the same question. They're one of 6 teams to ever do this. They're one of 16 to win, one of 6 teams total, to win their division or league when only winning at one point in the season under 10 days. It's absolutely crazy. I mean, I think the total, someone said it was 7 days, 6 or 7 days they only led the division. And heck, most of them were in September, right here in the last couple of days of the season. There was 2 or 3 days there. So that's pretty improbable to me. But now, TC, you're right. They're both improbable. This whole team has been improbable. I mentioned the home runs, the young kids coming up, Spencer Strider, Vaughn Grissom filling in, and of course, the Rookie of the Year, Michael Harris II, who I think is going to be the Rookie of the Year. The winner of the Cards Phils, that's who the Braves play in the division series. They'll start that Tuesday. Wayne, what's your thought on the world champion Atlanta Braves?
Well, they are the number 2 seed, if you want to call it that, right?
Yep, they are the 2 seed.
Well, that's a tough spot to be in for the reasons Todd said, but I'm still thinking it's going to be the Dodgers because I think that they are still kind of miffed about last year, and they're going to take it on everybody. And it's going to be New York Yankees and L.A. Dodgers in the World Series.
Talk about
the
viewership
would
grabber.
love that. JJ, the executives in New York would love that. Oh, my God.
That's what I just talk about viewership grabbing. That would do it.
Yep.
Well, folks, that wraps us up. Let's get into our pick 6. 6 games picked with Monday spreads. We're doing 4 and 2 again, 4 college, 2 pros. Let's go ahead and go over our standings. Right now, Wayne's at 14, 15, and 1. So is TC. I'm at 16, 13, and 1. And last week I took the cake at 5 and 1, and Wayne and Todd both went 3 and 3. So we've done pretty good with you guys on the pick 6 this year. We're all right around 500. I'm a couple games over, and let's get into it. Again, 6 games, Monday spread, 4 college, 2 pro. Let's go to college first. Number 8, Tennessee. They're 4-0 at number 25, LSU. In the other Death Valley, Tennessee's 2.5-point road favorites. Over-under in this one is huge at 64. I'll start this one off. The game's at 12 o'clock p.m. Eastern on ESPN. LSU has played extremely well since losing its open game to Florida State. Pretty much all that's between them and possibly a 5-0 start is a blocked extra point in an overtime period. So, LSU can play defense. So can Tennessee. This is going to be a lot lower scoring game. I'd take the under in this one because I like the Tigers and the points at home. I think LSU keeps this thing low scoring and pulls an upset. Max Johnson can throw the football. Tigers in Death Valley and those points, fellas.
Yeah, well, I'm taking Tennessee in the to cover on that one. I think that they're on a roll right now, and they like being on a roll, and they don't want to stop rolling.
TC?
Tennessee's fought 2 tough tests in Florida and Pitt. I like Tennessee to cover. This is not being played at 8 o'clock in Death Valley, where it's not at noon. It's not as loud and proud. The crowd's not as liquored up. I like Tennessee. I just think they're a better football team at this point.
Well, I'm going to win that one. That'll be an easy one for me. Number 2, It's going to
yes.
be TCU. Let me tell you why. You think Pitt is a good win when they've lost to Georgia Tech?
It was earlier. It's not when you play. It's not only who you play, but when
Look
you.
at the schedule. I think LSU's win against Mississippi State's one of the best ones in the country right now. Look,
Their loss
TCU,
against FSU was terrible.
FSU's only lost one game.
But that loss was terrible. It just was.
To Wake Forest?
No, I'm talking the loss for LSU to FSU was terrible.
They played terrible. It was week one in a neutral site game. They lost by one. I disagree. Let's get to the second game.
When you're playing in New Orleans, that's not a neutral site game for LSU. That's
sure. Agree to disagree. Number 17 TCU 4-0 at number 19 Kansas 5-0. TCU is a road 7-point favorite. Over under 67.5. TC started off. This one's at 12 o'clock p.m. on Fox Sports 1.
I like TCU to cover in this game. I think the Kansas magic ride ends here.
Wayne, what say you?
No, there's still magic in Kansas, and I've taken Kansas in the points on this one. Because I don't really like TCU either. Their fans are some of the most belligerent fans. Them and SMU are probably the two worst that I've ever seen.
Yeah, I love Kansas in the points here. I think TCU might win the game, but I'm taking Kansas in the points. They got a pretty impressive win on their schedule. College game day goes to Lawrence for the first time ever, and I think Kansas plays with a little passion. I really like the Jayhawks quarterback, Jelon Daniels, 983 passing yards on the season, 11 touchdowns, 1 interception, 68% completion rate. Let me tell you what, folks, it tells me he takes care of the football. They're a well-coached bunch. I think Lance Leopold covers the spread, may even get an outright W on the road. We're all expecting a good game there. It should be one for the ages. Number 11, Utah 4-1 at number 18, UCLA is 5-0. We talked about them earlier. Utah is a road 4.5-point favorite. Over-under in this one 64. This is a 3:30 p.m. kickoff on Fox. I'll go again. Utah could be 5-0 right now. The one interception thrown by quarterback Cam Rising this year was that game-ending pick in the swamp versus Florida. Utah has a better defense. They score more points per game. Give me Cam Rising and the Utah Utes.
Yeah. See, I picked against UCLA last week because I thought Washington was going to go undefeated, and so I'm not going to make that mistake here. I'm picking UCLA and the points at home.
TC, what you got?
Give me Utah. I think they're better defensively than UCLA.
Utah covers. Yeah, I think, Todd, you and I are on the same page there. I agree with you 100%. Our last college game of the evening, it was an off-season battle. We all thought this might be the most epic college football matchup all year. It was Saban versus Fisher. It's you bought your players, and God does this behind it, blah, blah, blah. We all know it. It's here. It's Texas A&M. They're 3-2 at number 1 Alabama, who is unbeaten and unblemished. Alabama is a 24-point favorite. Over-under in this one's 51. 8 p.m., the flex game on CBS. A&M's offense output has been almost non-existent at times. They are liable for turnovers. Bama takes advantage. I think Will Anderson is going to have a impact play, whether it be a pick six, scoop and score, or rips strip sack and someone else scoops and scores. That I think Will Anderson's going to make a game-changing play. And I like Bama to cover. Just doesn't seem like it's one of those point spreads that they want you to take A&M, so I'm taking Bama in the points. Bama covers.
Well, I'm taking A&M in the points on this one. I'm falling for it. The Vegas people have gotten me on their side, so I'm taking A&M in the points on this. They may not win the game, but with that many points, I don't see Alabama winning by more than 24.
I agree with Wayne. I mean, this is a large spread, and Texas A&M will play its best game of the year. They're going to have to play with desperation and passion. Their season's right now on the brink. Not only do they need to cover, they need to win it. I don't think they'll win it, but I believe they'll cover. And Bryce Young may not play this week.
Looks like all reports are leaning that he is going to make an effort to play, and I'm kind of leaning on that as well. The point spread hasn't changed much, so I'm thinking he's playing. That's why I keep it like that. Folks, let's get into the NFL. Falcons 2-2, Buccaneers 2-2. Battle for first place in the NFC South. Sunday, 1 o'clock Eastern on Fox. Tampa Bay is a 8-point favorite. Over-under is 48. Wayne, you go first, buddy.
Falcons and the points. Falcons and the points. I've already said it, so.
I love it.
That's a slam dunk. That's what he's going to do every week.
Bucks cover for TC. Am I correct?
Yes. They're playing Tampa Bay. It's not only who you play them, it's when you play them. Yeah. Patterson's not playing this week. No, I like Tampa to cover, and I like them to cover big.
Yeah, I think the Falcons are going to lose their first game against the spread this weekend. Tom Brady has averaged over 350 passing yards per game. And get this, he's thrown 15 touchdown passes versus the Falcons. That's right. He's averaging over 350 yards a game, 15 touchdown passes. Folks, he's only played 4 games against the Atlanta Falcons as a Tampa Bay Buccaneer. And that doesn't look good for me. So I'm going with the Bucks to cover. No Cordell Patterson. No 3 losses in a row for Tom Brady either. Hasn't happened in nearly 20 years. He's lost 2 in a row. He ain't losing 3 in a row. He'll win by 9 points.
Yeah, I'm going to change the logo for the show now to TPA Prime Sports.
I'm still JJ, he's never lost to Tom Brady's never lost to the Falcons neither. I don't see it.
Yeah, I don't see it happening. Well, folks, that wraps it up. Let's go into our final thought of the weekend.
Wait. One more game.
Do we have one more game?
Rams Cowboys.
Oh, yeah, I got so into it. I forgot the Rams Cowboys. Rams 2-2, Cowboys 3-1. Los Angeles is a 4.5-point favorite. Over under, that one's pretty low, 45.5. 4:25 p.m. on Fox. Look, Matthew Stafford gets back on track here, in my opinion. Rams only 9 points last week. If the Rams don't protect Stafford, though, Dallas will pull out the W, as he was sacked 7 times last week versus San Francisco. But again, I like the Rams to get going. I like Allen Robinson to have a big day, as I feel Dallas will key on Cooper Kupp and tight ends Tyler Higbee. Give me the Rams to cover. I like the Rams. I just don't know if Cooper Rush is the guy to get a W. I know he's unbeaten as a starter. I can't see it. So I'm picking Matthew Stafford and the Rams.
Yeah, I'm picking Cowboys and the points.
I like it, Wayne. It's not a bad pick. TC.
Well, he can only pick one or the other. I mean, if you like his pick, why aren't you picking the Cowboys? So anyhow, I look at it as this. The Rams have been a turnover machine. They've turned it over 9 times this season. Stafford's thrown 6 picks. Who do the Cowboys have in the secondary to pick it off? We all know. And Cooper Rush doesn't turn the ball over. There'll be a ton of Cowboy fans in Los Angeles. This is games in Los Angeles, right? It is,
no,
from what I understand.
It's in Jerry World. It's in Dallas.
I thought it was in Los Angeles. Are you sure?
Yep.
I think it was in. Why did I think it was in Dallas?
That's why I said Rams at Cowboys.
Is it really? Well, dang nabbit, I've got it's in Los Angeles. It's in Los Angeles. I have it right here.
I guess I dropped the ball on that one. Pick the game.
No, it's not that big of a deal. You know what? Maybe the Rams will cover, but the Dallas doesn't turn the ball over. They've got Diggs in the secondary. He likes to pick off passes. Does Matt Stafford really get? They're at home, but it really won't be a home game. This is 4.5. I like the Cowboys to cover. How about them Cowboys?
Yeah, no, you're right. It isn't SoFi Stadium. I flip-flopped that one, folks. Cowboys at Rams. I'm still taking the Rams at home. Look, like I said, I like Cooper Kupp to get double teamed. I like Allen Robinson to finally have a big day coming in from Chicago. Folks, that about wraps us up. Wayne, thanks for catching that for me before we left. My closing thought: it's the Deep South's oldest rivalry, Georgia versus Auburn. I like Georgia big. They're 30-point favorites. I don't know if they cover that, but I think they'll win by 24-25. So if you're a betting man, maybe Auburn and those points might be the ticket. But the Deep South's older rivalry, one of my favorite games of the year. Wayne, your final thought on the show, and then we'll go to TC for his final thought.
Yeah, I don't really want to talk about that oldest rivalry game because they're going to be playing in Athens, and unless some miracle happens, it's going to be bad for my Auburn Tigers.
Well, I mean, think about it.
Thought?
I was going to say, well, think about it. The last home game Georgia played, they struggled against Kent State. They're only up 10 points in the fourth quarter. They went to Missouri, and it was miserable for 3 quarters plus before they woke up and pulled that one out. I mean, you would think they would wake up, but 30 points is an awful lot. It may be closer than the experts think. But, you know, again, this college football season has been a season of surprises thus far. Something's going to happen that all of us don't expect to happen. That I can tell you. What it is, nobody knows.
Nobody knows. Well, folks, that wraps us up here at ATL Prime Sports. If you like the content, give us a like, give us a thumbs up. Thanks for listening. That's Wayne. That's TC. I'm JJ. That wraps us up. We'll see you next week, folks. Get you one.